Hi, this is Tatiana Temple, and I've spent about 2 decades designing data visualization, some of which you can see here. And this channel is for designers who want to improve their skills in this area. Today, we'll talk about a small area of data visualization, which some would consider controversial because there are opinions that pie charts, as you can see, we're going to talk about pie charts, that they should never ever be used because they're hard to whatever compare. And yes, it is true. However, pie charts, I think, from my experience, they have very effective and specific uses. And the first thing is why I like pie charts is because they are round. And circle is my favorite shape, and I just think it's so pleasing to look at. But it also subconsciously, a circle means whole, WHOLE, and it's like it's very natural if you want to compare a whole to a part of it that to use a circle, right, and slice off a part of it. And anyway, so this particular chart I'll just mention was done for a project called Justice Audit, and um, it represents the cases in Cooks County, their movement through the system, how many cases of which type, and whether they get resolved or they get moved to the next year and stuff like that. I'll talk about it a little bit more later. So the first rule is that you cannot have a pie of something that doesn't add up to 100% or a whole. Yeah, like on the right, if you see a bunch of percentages put together that add up to 500%, that's just not going to work. So the even though the parts may not be specifically percentages, but the sum total of them must make sense. For example, this chart that I recently designed shows the breakdown of the number of teachers and the number of schools in a survey in Kyrgyzstan done by USAID. And you can see that they are, the sum makes sense. It's written on top, and then there are the parts of that sum. So each slice represents a comparison between that slice and the whole, and between that slice and other slices. Let's talk about the reader's thinking process, since I mentioned it in my previous video that everything should be guided by the reader's thinking process. And here you also need to know who the reader is. And here, the readers obviously live in that country, most of them. Well, maybe not obviously, but for this report, the readers live in the country of Kyrgyzstan. So they are intimately familiar with all these names of regions and the cities. So their thinking process might be like, oh, which one is the biggest? Oh, Osh. Oh, okay, no, Osh or Osh city. And then which one's the smallest? Oh, the smallest one is Talas. It's like, okay, that makes sense. And then they might say, they might compare. When I chose the pie chart for this, even though it breaks a couple of rules, specifically the rule that there should not be more than 5 slices, I believe, but here we have more than 5. But still, you can compare them. Left to right, you can see that Jalalabad, for example, has more schools compared to the whole versus the students or teachers, which means there are fewer teachers per school in Jalalabad and so on. And Osh is actually the other way around. Osh has fewer schools with more teachers. So when sketching with data, what I do first is I try different visualizations before I arrive to this, conclusion of which visualization to use. And here I was like, oh, that's an interesting kind of play in between left to right, And also that I labeled every slice. I talked about labeling also in the previous video, that labels should be right on the spot so you can see everything. And I think with the labeling, it gives a pretty clear picture, and people can create or can make their own conclusions in their head based on what they already know and based on this visualization of what the picture looks like across the country. I also wanted to point out this book that has a lot of very useful rules for designing even pie charts. It was written by Donna M. Wong, who was I don't exactly know her title, but she used to work for the Wall Street Journal and was in charge of charts there. So you can trust that she has a lot of experience of charts that survived in the wild, quote unquote, as Edward Tufte calls it. So charts that millions of people read every day. So she really knows what she's talking about. Okay, so one of the rules that she describes in her book is that you don't need to color every slice a different color. There's absolutely no need for it. There are lines in between them, and that is enough separation. You can, of course, I mean, if it's fun, or especially if you have a legend, then you have to color the slices. But in this case, when they're labeled directly on top of the slice with the name and the number, there's no need to color them differently. And another rule is the order of the slices. Donna Wong writes that the top right slice, in this case Osh City, should start on the top right, like a clock. But the second biggest slice doesn't go after that. It actually goes on the top left and then counterclockwise in the descending order. So Jalalabad, then Chui, Bishkek, then Batken, and so on. They're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This is to avoid the smallest little slice sitting on the top left, which is a very prominent position. So this is the way she suggests to do it. The rule that I did break, that I mentioned before, is that she says the pie should not have more than 5 slices. In this case, I think 7 is okay. At least it's not 15. There is this, I think there was research done that a mind can hold 7 items at one time. And I just personally, I think this chart works. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. And also, another rule is that you should not compare pie charts. But again, here I think it works because these are the same slices, and you can kind of, because they're labeled and they're not, I don't know, it just kind of works. You can compare Butkin to Butkin, sort of. You see that the number of schools is bigger than the number of teachers, and so on. So about pie chart comparison, I found one way, and I think I came up with it myself, of comparing these pie charts that are basically one number. So it's not comparing like a 3-slice pie chart, it's basically a 2-slice pie chart. But if this set of data is from a survey, and the people who ordered the survey, they wanted to see the entire data set. So it's not exactly a dramatic story. However, if you want to see everything, this type of visualization provides the eye with the ability to see very minute variations. So you can basically distinguish easily, like the second row, for example, 71% versus 77 in the third row. And it's kind of cool and creates like this, it's called data quilt. And if you scan, for example, the left chart, you scan the entire chart, you notice like, 87 different, which would have been less easy if this were just a table. So yeah, you can easily spot these little outliers. Pies can also be donuts of various thickness. So there was this research done. I'm gonna link this article in the comments or in the description, that which one is more effective, donut or a pie with a corner in the middle. But it's kind of up to you. I think it's more of an aesthetical decision. And so this chart is, I think, quite good for illustration purposes. It shows, I did it 8 years ago and I still like it, surprisingly, but it shows how many companies reported their carbon emissions to CDP in 2012 or 13, and the percentage of those companies that made it to the leadership index, so-called, which means they're doing a good job at either reporting or cutting their emissions. And so here we see a donut, which is a super thick donut, but I just didn't like that. Sometimes I don't like that corner of the pie, the center of the pie where the corner of the slices are, and they're just kind of a little jarring, so I put a little circle on there. I don't know if it's the best aesthetical decision, tell me. Secondly, it's the Pac-Man part, right? The percentage that is a slice which is aligned along the vertical axis, so you can see the difference easily. And the third one is the size of the pie, which shows the number of companies in each sector. So you can easily see that 40% of telecom services companies made it to the leadership index, but there are only 5 companies in that sector anyway. So I think it does a really good job at showing these two variables. There are many alternatives to pie charts. The most obvious one would be vertical bars like shown here. So they're much easier to compare, but we lose the circle, we lose the pretty image of the circle. But if if it's critical, or there are so many bars like this, would be impossible to compare with pie charts, to be honest, right? So then we have bars next to one another. You need to make sure that you indicate, label it that these are 100%. Sometimes, these bars add to 100%, sometimes they don't. So you need to label it very clearly. And you can also do half pies, which are really cute. And they're like little gauges. And you can do a bubble chart as well, which, this could theoretically be a pie chart because they show the parts of the whole membership in this health organization in New Zealand. Actually, I think it's people coming to a conference. So here I use this bubble chart also to mark the location of those cities or provinces or whatever they're called in New Zealand from where people were coming. So this is kind of cute. And the last thing I want to talk about is labeling of the data or information. And here I wanted to come back to this chart that we saw before of Cooks County justice audit, the cases moving through the system. And as you see, I tried to label everything right on the spot except the colors. The colors are a legend, but I think it's highly important that the reader won't have to dart their eyes back and forth looking for information. Everything is absolutely right there on the spot. I also recommend, there's a great article called Rudiments of Numeracy, which is an interesting term, and it talks about how using too many decimal points and too many numbers really confuses a person. So I highly recommend not to use decimal points because it's really not that important to the reader. So yeah. So anyway, so this concludes my little pie chart explanation of what I know. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please comment below. Please write to me at Tatiana on my site, TatianaTemple.com. And I hope to see you in the next videos.